The air in the Naval Transit Processing Center at Pearl Harbor was a thick, unpalatable soup. It carried the metallic tang of ozone, a premonition of the storm that was gathering its dark skirts over the Pacific, preparing to lash the island of Oahu. Underneath that electric scent was the more familiar perfume of military logistics, the acrid bite of diesel from the idling transport buses outside, the burnt sugar smell of stale coffee from a perpetually on urn in a forgotten corner, and the faint, pervasive odor of damp wool and industrial cleaning solvents. The sounds were a disquieting symphony of echoes. The sharp, rhythmic slap of polished boots on worn linoleum floors, the dull, heavy clang of sea bags being dropped onto steel benches, and the disembodied voice of an announcer on the public address system. Her words blurred into an unintelligible monotone by the cavernous acoustics of the building. It was a place of waiting, a purgatory between the world left behind and the world to which one was being sent, and it was saturated with the quiet tension of 1,000 private farewells and unspoken anxieties. In the center of this swirling eddy of uniformed humanity, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Gallo held court. He was a man built not of flesh and bone, but of naval tradition and sheer, unadulterated self-regard. His neck was as thick as a mooring line, and his barrel chest strained against the perfectly starched fabric of his khaki uniform, which seemed less like clothing and more like a suit of armor forged from regulation and pride. His face looked like it had been carved from the very teak of the USS Constitution's deck, all hard lines and weathered certainty. Authority did not just cling to him. It radiated from him like heat from a furnace, a palpable force field that bent the space around him. Younger sailors instinctively straightened their posture as he passed, their eyes darting away from his critical gaze. He moved through the terminal not as a passenger, but as its lord and master, the gatekeeper of this specific transient domain. His voice was a baritone boom that effortlessly cut through the ambient noise, dispensing unsolicited advice, sharp corrections, and booming laughter in equal measure. He was the living embodiment of the institution, or at least the version of it he carried in his own head. Loud, proud, and utterly convinced of its own infallibility. Across the echoing hall, far from the gravitational pull of Chief Gallo's ego, a woman sat alone. She was an island of stillness in a sea of motion. Had anyone bothered to truly look at her, they would have seen an exercise in deliberate anonymity. She wore simple, functional civilian clothes that were meant to be ignored. Black cargo pants, practical and bearing a few faint old stains of grease or dust. A plain heather gray t-shirt that fit well but drew no attention. And a pair of worn, scuffed hiking boots that had clearly seen more than their share of difficult terrain. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot at the nape of her neck. She was smaller than most of the men in the room, her frame lean and compact. She could have been a contractor, a dependent who had taken a wrong turn, a tourist hopelessly lost on the sprawling base. She held no phone, no book, no tablet. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, one over the other. Her entire being was focused into a state of profound, unnerving calm. Her gaze was not vacant. It was actively observant, sweeping the room in slow, methodical patterns, cataloging the flow of personnel, the structural layout of the building, the placement of the exits, the flickering of the overhead fluorescent lights. She was not waiting. She was assessing. This woman, who seemed to be a footnote in the bustling narrative of the room, was Dr. Eris Thorne. But the name, like her appearance, was a vessel for something far more complex. To the few who knew her true function, she was not Dr. Thorne, a civilian academic. She was Watcher, a call sign whispered with a unique mixture of reverence and fear in the most secure briefing rooms in the world. She was a ghost in the machine of modern warfare, a lead strategist and design architect for the most classified and lethally effective projects under the purview of Special Operations Command. Her outward plainness was a form of camouflage, as sophisticated as any digital pattern, a carefully constructed cloak of mediocrity that allowed her to move through the world unseen, to observe the machinery of power without becoming a visible part of it. Her stillness was not passivity. It was the absolute economy of energy practiced by apex predators, the coiled potential of a spring compressed to its limit. She was a lioness, allowing a pack of jackals to dance and squabble at the very edge of her kill radius, utterly unconcerned by their noise because she understood the fundamental, unbridgeable gap between their perceived power and her actual capability. Chief Gallo, in his self-appointed role as the terminal's shepherd, finally let his sweeping, judgmental gaze fall upon this quiet anomaly. His internal calculus was immediate and deeply flawed, a product of years of ingrained prejudice and institutional arrogance. He saw a civilian. He saw a woman. He saw someone small and alone in a place where size and affiliation were the primary currencies of respect. To his mind, these three data points added up to a single conclusion. She did not belong. She was a problem to be solved, an irregularity to be corrected, and an opportunity to publicly reassert his own authority. He adjusted his cover, squaring his shoulders as he began to move toward her, his heavy boots making a sound like hammers striking an anvil on the worn floor. The air in front of him seemed to part, the younger sailors and Marines creating a path for his righteous advance. He was not just walking, he was on a mission, a petty crusade to enforce the order he so cherished. And he was entirely, blissfully unaware that he was striding toward the most profound and humiliating education of his entire career. He saw a lost sheep. He was, in fact, approaching the shepherd who owned the entire flock, the field, and the sky above. The chief came to a stop directly in front of her, planting his feet in a wide, confrontational stance. He loomed over her, a mountain of starched khaki and unearned confidence, casting her small form in his shadow. "Ma'am," he began, his voice dripping with a condescending patience that was far more insulting than outright anger. "You're a little lost, aren't you? This area is for deploying personnel only. The civilian terminal is back on the other side of the base." He gestured vaguely with a thumb over his shoulder, the motion both dismissive and patronizing. He expected a flutter of confusion, perhaps an apology, the typical reaction of a civilian caught in the gears of the military machine. He expected to be able to magnanimously guide her away, another small victory for order and his own importance. Iris Thorne did not look up immediately. She finished her slow, methodical scan of the far side of the room, her eyes briefly noting the stress fractures forming around a window frame from the wind that was beginning to press against the building. Only then did she lift her head, her gray eyes meeting his. They were calm, clear, and utterly unreadable, like polished stones at the bottom of a deep river. There was no fear in them, no confusion, no deference. "I'm in the right place," she said. Her voice was quiet, a simple statement of fact with no emotional inflection whatsoever. It was not a challenge, nor was it a plea. It was information, delivered with the flat finality of a mathematical truth. The response was so contrary to Gallo's expectations that it caused a momentary glitch in his programming. He had come prepared for a debate, an argument, or a capitulation. He was not prepared for simple, unadorned certainty from a source he had already deemed invalid. The lack of an emotional reaction from her was like throwing a lit match into a vacuum. Without the fuel of her fear or anger, his own aggression had nowhere to go, and it began to curdle into frustration. "I don't think you understand, lady," he said, his voice growing louder, drawing the attention of those on the nearby benches. A small audience began to form, sensing the first tremors of a public confrontation. "This is a restricted military transport hub. You need official orders. You need a common access card. You can't just wander in here." At her feet sat a small, nondescript black duffel bag. It was unmarked, its fabric worn. Seeing it, Gallo found a new target for his righteous indignation. He nudged the bag with the polished toe of his boot, a gesture of profound disrespect. "What's in here? Souvenirs? Beach towels?" The bag was unzipped just enough to offer a glimpse of its contents. There was no clothing, no toiletries. There was only a block of custom-molded foam, and nestled within it, a single, intricately shaped piece of translucent plastic and wiring. A custom-fitted covert earpiece, the kind used exclusively with encrypted burst transmission radios fielded by Tier 1 units. It was a piece of equipment more classified and expensive than anything Chief Gallo had ever been issued. Eris Thorne leaned forward, not with haste, but with a deliberate, fluid motion. She took the zipper and slowly, silently, pulled it shut. She did not snatch the bag away. She did not glare at him. She simply secured her property. Then she looked back at him, her gaze as steady as before. "Chief," she said, her voice still unnervingly quiet, "I suggest you return to your duties." This was the final straw. It was one thing to be questioned. It was another to be calmly, coolly dismissed. In his world, chiefs were not dismissed, especially not by small civilian women in places they did not belong. Her utter lack of fear, her refusal to play the role he had assigned her, was an intolerable affront to his authority and his worldview. He saw it as a brazen act of defiance, a public challenge that he had to meet with overwhelming force. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. He straightened to his full height, his voice now a full-throated roar that silenced the entire terminal, every head turned toward them. "That's it. I've had enough of this. You're in a restricted military area. You have no identification. You're refusing a lawful order, and you're carrying suspicious equipment. For all I know, you're a spy. For all I know, you're a terrorist." He was grandstanding now, playing to the crowd, his accusations growing more outlandish with each breath. "You think you can come on my base in my terminal and impersonate someone with authority? You think you can wear a SEAL trident just by acting tough?" He had no idea why he said that. The thought just leapt into his head, a nonsensical escalation born of pure rage. She was nothing like a SEAL in his mind, which made the accusation feel potent. He turned and bellowed toward the entrance. "Master-at-Arms, get me the MAAs in here now. I have a situation. We have a possible imposter, a security threat. I'm placing this individual under arrest." The words, spoken with such theatrical fury, hung in the suddenly silent air. The two MAAs stationed at the door, young and eager, began to move toward the scene, their hands automatically going to the sidearms on their belts. Chief Gallo crossed his arms over his massive chest, a triumphant, smug look on his face. He had won. He had cornered the anomaly, exposed the fraud, and restored order. He had made an example of her. He stood there basking in the silence of the room, completely unaware that he had just committed the single greatest act of professional suicide in his 20-year career. He had not arrested a threat. He had just declared war on a god. At the precise moment the two young master-at-arms reached the silent tableau, their expressions a mixture of confusion and procedural seriousness, the world ended. It did not end with a bang, but with a piercing, soul-shattering shriek. An alarm klaxon, one rarely heard outside of the most dire drills, blasted through the terminal, a sound designed to bypass thought and trigger pure, adrenalized panic. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered violently, once, twice, and then died, plunging the cavernous space into a disorienting gloom. A heartbeat later, emergency lights kicked in, casting the scene in the hellish, pulsing crimson of a submarine on battle stations. Outside, the wind, which had been a persistent whisper, rose to a primal howl, a physical force that slammed against the building like a giant's fist. A high window on the second story of the terminal, unable to withstand the sudden, immense pressure differential, exploded inwards with a deafening crash, sending a shower of glass and a blast of horizontal, stinging rain into the upper mezzanine. The PA system crackled, struggled, and then a new voice, strained with urgency, screamed over the klaxon. "Typhoon warning! Typhoon warning! Condition of readiness 1 is in effect! I repeat, condition 1! All personnel, proceed immediately to designated, hardened shelters! This is not a drill! This is not a drill!" The carefully maintained order of the terminal evaporated in an instant. The quiet tension curdled into open panic. Young sailors, some on their first deployment, looked around with wide, terrified eyes, their training momentarily forgotten. Marines, more accustomed to direct action than natural disasters, began to move with purpose but without a unified direction. It was a leaderless mob, a collection of individuals suddenly fighting for their own survival. Into this vacuum of command stepped Chief Gallo, his previous confrontation forgotten, his mind snapping back to his procedural training. He did what he knew how to do. He shouted, "All right, listen up, everyone, form a line, single file. We will proceed in an orderly fashion to shelter Bravo 7. His voice was loud, a booming assertion of authority, but his orders were pure textbook fantasy. The concept of a single-file line in the face of a Category 4 typhoon was absurd. The building was groaning, the wind shrieking like a tortured animal, and he was trying to impose parade ground discipline on a stampede. He was a man screaming nautical regulations at a tidal wave. The two MAAs, their mission to arrest the quiet woman now utterly irrelevant, joined in, adding their own shouts to the cacophony. "Move it! Move it! To the south exit! Stay calm. Don't push." Their efforts were well-intentioned but futile, only adding to the general sense of chaos. They were trying to manage a crowd, but what the situation required was a strategic, engineering-level response to a collapsing structure. The power grid, already unstable, gave up the ghost completely. The red emergency strobes died, and the terminal was plunged into absolute, terrifying blackness, broken only by the intermittent flashes of lightning from the raging storm outside, each flash revealing a frozen tableau of frightened faces. The roar of the wind became the only sound, an all-consuming presence that vibrated through the concrete floor and into the bones of every person trapped inside. The institution, with all its starched uniforms and loud commands, had failed. Its authority was a fiction, blown away by the first real gust of wind. In the suffocating darkness and the heart of the roaring chaos, where every other human being was either frozen in fear or moving with frantic, inefficient energy, Aris Thorne shifted. The transition was breathtaking. The quiet, unassuming woman who had sat on the bench vanished, and in her place was something else entirely, a creature of pure, focused purpose. Her previous stillness had not been emptiness. It had been a state of absolute potential energy. Now, that energy was released, converted into kinetic motion that was fluid, economical, and unnervingly graceful. She did not stumble in the dark. She did not hesitate. She moved as if she had a perfect three-dimensional blueprint of the building imprinted on her mind, her steps sure and swift. She flowed through the panicked, jostling crowd like a surgeon's scalpel, never touching anyone. Her path a line of impossible efficiency. Her first destination was a large, gray metal box on the wall marked Maintenance and Electrical. It was locked. Without breaking stride, she reached into a pocket of her cargo pants, and her hand emerged with a small, flat piece of metal, a multi-tool. With a few deft, precise movements that spoke of infinite practice, she bypassed the industrial lock. The heavy door swung open. Inside was a tangle of wiring, circuit breakers, and, on a dusty shelf, exactly what she was looking for. A portable emergency tactical radio, the kind kept for disaster recovery teams, and a heavy, sealed battery pack. Her hands worked in the near-total darkness with a terrifying competence, her fingers flying over clips, ports, and dials by touch alone. She attached the battery, keyed the microphone, and twisted the channel knob. She did not tune it to the base-wide emergency frequency, which she knew would be a useless, screaming chaos of panicked voices. She spun the dial to a specific encrypted frequency that did not officially exist on any chart available to a man like Chief Gallo. She keyed the mic. Her voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. The quiet, flat tone was gone, replaced by a voice of pure, compressed command. It was crisp, clinical, and carried an inherent authority that cut through the roar of the storm like a laser. "Sea Dragon, this is Watcher. Radio check, over." The names hung in the dark air, alien and potent. A split second of static, and then a voice, equally calm and professional, answered in her ear, audible only to her. "Watcher, this is Sea Dragon. We have you 5 by 5. What is your sit rep? The grid is down island-wide." Gallo, who had been trying to shove a jammed door open, froze. He was close enough to hear her, to hear that impossible call sign. Watcher? Sea Dragon? It was a language he did not speak, from a world he did not know. He turned, his eyes struggling to find her in the darkness. "Sea Dragon," Aris broadcast, her voice never rising, yet utterly dominant. "I have a critical situation. Pearl Transit Center is compromised, full power failure. I am sheltering approximately 200 personnel, mixed services, with minimal command structure. The building's integrity is failing under Condition 1 storm impact. I am taking tactical command of this location. Designation Strong Point Alpha. Acknowledge." The response was instantaneous, without a hint of question or hesitation. "Watcher, Sea Dragon copies all. Command is yours. Strong Point Alpha is on the board. What are your requirements, over?" And with that, the masterclass began. Aris Thorne, now fully inhabiting her role as Watcher, became the central nervous system of the entire building. She began issuing a stream of calm, precise, and complex orders that were so far beyond the scope of conventional procedure that they seemed to come from the future. "I need a lighting solution," she said, her head turning as if she could see every person in the room. "Who here is assigned to a Naval Mobile Construction Battalion? A CB, speak up." A hesitant voice called out from the darkness. Petty Officer 3rd Class Davies, sir." "Ma'am." "Davies," Aris said, her voice sharp. "In the main electrical closet you'll find a manual transfer switch for the secondary generator. It's not on the main grid. It powers the runway guidance lights. Bypass the primary breakers and route it directly to the internal lighting conduits. You have 3 minutes." The young CB, who had been cowering moments before, was galvanized by the specificity and confidence of the command. "I," he shouted, and disappeared into the gloom. I need a barricade team," she continued, her voice never faltering. "All personnel assigned to Marine Expeditionary Units, sound off." A chorus of "Urras" and "Here, sirs" echoed from a corner of the room. "Good. The north-facing wall is a single-pane curtain window system. It will not hold. Take the steel benches, every table, every heavy object you can find, and brace that wall from the inside. Build it wide and build it thick. Go." A sergeant bellowed, "You heard her, move!" And the Marines, given a clear and tangible mission, became a whirlwind of disciplined activity. She turned her attention to the growing number of injured from the initial panic and the shattered glass. Who are the corpsmen? Who are the medics? Several hands went up, visible in another flash of lightning. Triage center. Here. She stamped her foot on the floor. Use the baggage claim carousel as your primary bed. Red tags. Anyone with arterial bleeding or compromised breathing, get priority. Use shirts for tourniquets, belts for splints. Report your casualty count to me every 5 minutes. The corpsmen, adrift moments before, now had structure and purpose. They moved to obey. Chief Gallo and the 2 MAAs could only stand and watch, rendered completely and utterly impotent. They were bystanders at their own emergency. This woman, this civilian whom Gallo had been about to arrest for impersonation, was now conducting a symphony of survival in the dark. Her every word a command. Her every command a precise, life-saving calculation. She was not just leading. She was operating on a level of situational awareness and crisis management that was almost inhuman. The onlookers, from the lowest seaman to the arrogant chief, were frozen in a state of silent, dawning, terrified awe. They were in the presence of a master, and the sheer scale of her competence was more powerful and intimidating than any rank or uniform. Just as the young CB successfully rerouted the generator, causing a section of the internal lights to flicker back to life with a steady, reassuring hum, the main doors at the south entrance began to groan. It was not the sound of the wind, it was the rhythmic, percussive impact of something heavy and deliberate striking the outside. The panicked crowd, momentarily calmed by the return of light, flinched back. The doors, designed to withstand significant force, bowed inward, their steel frames screaming in protest. Finally, with a deafening screech of tortured metal, the lock mechanism shattered and the doors were forced open, not blown apart by the storm, but pushed ajar against the immense pressure of the wind. Into the breach stepped a figure, then another and another. They were clad head to toe in black, state-of-the-art all-weather gear, their forms bulky with tactical vests and equipment. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of wolves entering a sheep pen. The lead figure stepped fully into the light, his team fanning out behind him, their weapons held at a low, ready position as their eyes scanned and assessed the room in a fraction of a second. He was taller than the others, his presence commanding even under the layers of gear. He reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing a face that seemed to have been carved from granite by a gale-force wind. It was the face of a man who had spent a lifetime making impossible decisions in the worst places on Earth. Sewn onto his collar were the silver eagles of a Navy captain. This was Captain Hayes, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 3, a living legend within the SEAL teams. He was the Recognizer. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept across the scene. He took in the braced curtain wall, the makeshift triage center operating with quiet efficiency, the calm and ordered state of the 200 personnel who had been in a full-blown panic only minutes before. His gaze bypassed the stunned and useless form of Chief Petty Officer Gallo as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes searched, and then they found her. He strode forward, his boots making no sound. His team remained at the door, a silent, lethal perimeter. He walked directly toward Aris Thorne, who stood near the center of the room, the tactical radio still in her hand. He did not slow down. He did not hesitate. He came to a halt precisely 3 feet in front of her, his posture ramrod straight. In the stunned silence of the terminal, broken only by the howl of the wind outside, Captain Hayes, a pillar of the naval special warfare community, executed a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a movement of profound, almost violent respect, his hand slicing through the air and snapping to his brow with a sound like tearing canvas. His voice, a low, gravelly thunder that every SEAL operator knew and respected, filled the space. "Dr. Thorne, you have the con." The world stopped. For every sailor, marine, and officer in that room, the sight was a fundamental violation of the natural order. Captains do not salute civilians. Legends do not defer. The gesture was a public declaration so powerful, so contrary to the rigid hierarchy of their universe, that it completely short-circuited their understanding of reality. The 200 souls in the room held their collective breath. Chief Gallo, his face a mask of disbelief, his worldview shattering like the window upstairs, finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, stammering squeak. "Sir, Captain, this woman, she's a civilian. She has no authority here. I was placing her under arrest for posing." Captain Hayes did not immediately turn. He held his salute for a second longer, a mark of ultimate respect for Aris, before crisply dropping his hand. Only then did he pivot his head, his gaze falling upon Chief Gallo with the weight of an iceberg. The warmth that had been in his eyes when he looked at Aris was gone, replaced by a glacial fury that was terrifying to behold. "Chief," he said, his voice dangerously low, "this woman is Dr. Aris Thorne." He spoke the name as if it were a weapon system. "She is the lead design architect and senior strategic analyst for Project Chimera. She holds a Tier 1 operational designation, direct from SOCOM headquarters, with a call sign you are not cleared to know." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "She wrote the doctrine on unconventional crisis response and asymmetric threat mitigation. The book you were supposed to have read 3 years ago. The protocols you failed to implement tonight? She invented them. She has more time logged in non-permissive environments than your entire division combined." He took a step closer to the now trembling chief, his voice dropping even further, becoming a venomous whisper that was somehow louder than Gallo's previous shouts. "She is not posing as anything, Chief. She is the standard. She is the authority to which even I defer in a situation like this. You did not find an imposter. You found the single most critical human asset on this island, and you, in your breathtaking arrogance, decided to harass her. You put her under arrest?" The question hung in the air, an indictment of such monumental scale that Gallo visibly shrank. The name Dr. Aris Thorne and the call sign she had used, Watcher, descended upon the room like a tactical strike, rewriting reality for everyone present. The bitter irony was crushing. Gallo had accused her of posing as a SEAL. The truth was infinitely more profound. She didn't pose as an operator. She was the architect of their operations, the mind behind their lethality, the ghost in their machine. She was something rarer and far, far more important. In the aftermath, as the typhoon's fury abated and the first organized relief crews began to arrive from the main base, A semblance of normal order returned. But the atmosphere in the transit terminal was forever changed. The 200 personnel who had been trapped within its walls now moved with a quiet, reverent purpose, their eyes constantly darting toward the small, unassuming woman who was coordinating the next phase of the recovery with Captain Hayes and his team. Chief Gallo was sitting on a baggage crate in a far corner, his uniform, once a source of immense pride, now looking like a cheap costume. He was a man hollowed out, the entire foundation of his identity pulverized into dust. He stared at the concrete floor, tracing the cracks with his eyes, seeing in them the fissures that had just ripped through his life. Eris Thorne, having handed off tactical command to a newly arrived engineering unit, approached him. She moved with the same quiet deliberation as before, her footsteps making little sound. She stopped not in front of him, but slightly to his side, so as not to loom over him. She did not come in anger or triumph. She came as an assessor, an analyst delivering a final, critical report. "Chief Petty Officer Gallo," she said. Her voice returned to its calm, clinical tone. He flinched at the sound of his own name. "Your actions today were not a personal insult," she continued, her words precise and devastating. "An insult is an emotional event. This was a tactical failure. It warrants a tactical debriefing." Gallo slowly lifted his head, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 2 hours. "Your primary error," Aris stated, "was an over-reliance on flawed heuristics. You made an assumption based on incomplete visual data. You saw a woman. You saw civilian clothes. You saw a non-compliant posture. Your training and your prejudice combined these data points and produced a false positive. Threat, or insignificant. You failed to consider the possibility of a data point outside your experience set. You failed to ask the right questions. You escalated a situation based on ego instead of de-escalating it to gather more intelligence. In a real-world, hostile environment, Chief, that exact sequence of cognitive failures would have resulted in the catastrophic loss of your entire team. Your pride would have been the weapon that killed them." Her words were not a condemnation. They were a diagnosis, delivered with the detached precision of a surgeon explaining the spread of a cancer. It was this clinical detachment that made them so utterly crushing. She was not angry at him. He was simply a problem she had analyzed. At that moment, Captain Hayes walked over, his expression grim. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "say the word. I will personally escort this man to the master-at-arms. We'll have his stripes before sunrise. He'll be lucky if he ends his career swabbing decks in Adak." Aris held up a hand, a small, simple gesture that immediately halted the captain. "No, Captain," she said thoughtfully. "That's inefficient. A court-martial is a punitive action. It teaches a lesson to others, but it teaches the subject himself very little, other than resentment. It removes a piece from the board, but it doesn't improve the game." She turned her gaze back to the broken man on the crate. Her eyes, for the first time, held something other than calm assessment. It was the look of a master craftsman deciding how to reshape a flawed piece of material. "Chief Gallo," she said, her voice now holding a new, steely edge. "My next deployment is a joint operational analysis in a non-permissive environment. It is classified above your current clearance. I am leaving in 72 hours. I am requisitioning you for my personal detail, effective immediately." Gallo and Hayes both stared at her, stunned into silence. "You will be read into the program," she continued, leaving no room for argument. "You will carry my gear. You will maintain my equipment. You will stand post outside my briefings. You will observe my methods. You will learn the critical difference between the authority that is issued with a rank and the authority that is earned through competence. You will learn to see what is actually in front of you, not what your assumptions tell you should be there. Your re-education begins now. This is not a request. Chief Petty Officer Gallo, the man who had roared with authority just hours before, could only look up at this quiet, formidable woman and nod his head, a single, slow, submissive gesture. His punishment would not be demotion. It would be education at the hand of the very master he had so foolishly challenged. It was a far more profound and ultimately more transformative sentence. The story of that stormy day in Pearl Harbor did not stay within the walls of the transit terminal. It bled out, as all powerful stories do, carried first by the 200 witnesses, then by Captain Hayes's SEAL team, and then it spread like wildfire through the entire special operations community and beyond. It became a modern military fable, a piece of institutional lore, told in the ready rooms of aircraft carriers, in the dusty chow halls of forward operating bases, and over beers in the dive bars that dot the coastlines from Coronado to Virginia Beach. With each telling, the story grew. The typhoon became a hurricane of impossible scale. The number of people Eris Thorne saved doubled, then tripled. Her commands became more poetic, her insights more prophetic. But while the details were embellished into legend, the core, immutable truth of the event remained perfectly intact. A hard, diamond-like lesson that was passed down from senior NCOs to cocky new recruits. It was the story of the Watcher and the Chief, a cautionary tale about the mortal danger of hubris, and a powerful parable about the true nature of strength. Years passed. The legend endured. In a sterile, brightly lit classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, a group of young, formidable SEAL candidates, the best and brightest of their generation, were undergoing a technical briefing. They were lions in the making, apex predators in training, and they were brimming with the kind of arrogant confidence that only youth and proven physical prowess can bestow. Their instructor for the day was a civilian, a quiet man with glasses and a slightly nervous energy, who was trying to explain the complex nuances of a new encrypted communications suite. The young operators were not openly disrespectful, but their disdain was palpable. They shifted in their seats, shared sidelong glances, and one of them asked a question with a barely concealed, condescending edge. Before the civilian could answer, a new figure stepped into the classroom from the back. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer, his uniform immaculate, his face a roadmap of a long and difficult career. The anchor on his collar was tarnished with the salt of 1,000 deployments. He moved with a quiet authority that instantly silenced the room and brought the young lions to a state of rigid attention. It was Marcus Gallo. He was older, his hair gray at the temples, the boisterous arrogance of his youth long since burned away and replaced by a deep, calm wisdom. He walked to the front of the room and stood beside the civilian instructor, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He then turned his gaze to the young SEAL candidate who had asked the dismissive question. Master Chief Gallo did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Let me tell you all a story," he said, his voice low and resonant. "It's about a rainy day in Pearl Harbor, a long time ago. It's about a young, loud, and stupid Chief Petty Officer who thought his rank made him a king. And it's about the biggest, most humiliating, and most important mistake of my entire life." He paused, and his eyes swept over the faces of the young men before him. "Let me tell you about the Watcher." For the next hour, he held them completely captive, not with a lecture on regulations, but with the raw, honest, and brutal story of his own failure. He used his own humiliation as the ultimate teaching tool, a gift of hard-won wisdom to the next generation. He had been transformed, his life's purpose now dedicated to ensuring no one else ever made the same mistake he did. He had become a recognizer in his own right. The story of Dr. Aris Thorne and Master Chief Gallo is more than just a military anecdote. It is a fundamental lesson about the nature of power and respect, a moral that transcends the uniformed world and speaks to a universal truth. It teaches us that true strength is rarely loud. True authority does not need to announce itself. It is quiet, it is competent, and it is demonstrated, not declared. It is the surgeon with the steady hand, not the politician with the loud voice. It is the engineer who finds the flaw in the blueprint, not the executive who takes credit for the design. It is the quiet professional, in every field of human endeavor, whose value is not in what they say, but in what they do. We live in a world that is obsessed with appearances, that mistakes confidence for competence and volume for value. We are drawn to the boastful, the flamboyant, and the self-aggrandizing. But the work of the world, the real, difficult, life-saving work, is almost always done by the quiet ones. It is done by the watchers. They do not seek the spotlight. They do not demand respect. They simply are what they are, and their actions are their only necessary argument. The story serves as a vital reminder. Do not judge by the cover. Do not underestimate the still and silent, for in the quietest corners often reside the greatest strengths, and true mastery whispers while arrogance roars. Look for the substance, not the style. Look for the person who is listening more than they are speaking. For that is where you will find the ones who, when the storm comes and the lights go out, will know exactly what to do.